Are you kicking off?
Yeah, welcome to Fresh Off the Boat. I'm delighted to be chatting with Ishan Agarwal, a student I've known since 2013-14. When he was in Calcutta, I used to visit and also guide him back then. But now I think he can guide so many listeners interested in CS and tech and anything related to Brown and otherwise. So welcome, Ishan. So delighted to have reconnected today with you. So my first question to you, Ishan, is related to settling in at a new university campus way back in 2015 when you went to Brown University in Rhode Island. What was it like? What resources did you use? And what trials and tribulations did you go through?
Super glad to be here, Arjun. Quick background on me. I'm Ishan. I grew up in Calcutta, started Brown in 2015 summer or fall rather. So when I started college, that was the first summer or first time I'd been in Rhode Island or even the US. I think something that particularly helped me a lot was talking to people who had gone through the same process. So I know there's like a lot of small and sometimes seemingly like inconsequential questions that can be like super annoying to just figure out without help from others. So I think it's helpful to just like talk to people who have gone through that journey, whether it's like, oh, like how do dorms work, or how do I even get around? So I think just like I think most universities have a lot of resources to guide students and like help them get oriented. They have like mentors, and I think those are super helpful.
Great. So if you were to look at settling in academically, coming in from ISC school, Indian National Curriculum, which is very different from, say, what universities in the US really look for in students. How did you start understanding the system? What advising did you seek? And overall, how did it pan out towards your major? Did you go decided, undecided, and so on and so forth?
So I'd say in terms of patterns of study, there's like two major differences that I had to get used to. I think when I was in school, it was you studied in like ebbs and flows, where it's like you pretty much chilled for a few months and then the exams roll around and then you slogged and like you could do decently well on exams and like pretty much cram a lot of information into a month. But it doesn't really work like that in college, where I think you have to be a lot more consistent. So it has to be like, okay, like every week or every month you're keeping up with your projects, because your final grade isn't just like one exam you take at the end of the year. It's like, no, how have you been doing throughout the semester? The other thing is you realize like you just can't solve everything yourself. Like you need a lot more help than a lot of people like might have been previously accustomed to. And like there's nothing like people shouldn't feel shy in asking for help. So I think something that helped me a lot was just teaching assistants. So like actually going to office hours, going to professors, going to teaching assistants to help like understand the material that I was exposed to. That's something like that isn't really common in high school, but I think is crucial in college.
Fantastic. I think understanding that your interest in computer science was very well established even in high school. Did you still explore other things, and how are the gen eds at Brown, which is quite famous for its interdisciplinary education? And how did it influence you to think about what you wanted to do in the future before deciding that CS is going to be my declared major?
So that's actually a really good question. I think the fact that Brown had an open curriculum changed what I actually ended up studying a lot. Even though I declared and officially studied computer science, I took like a lot of classes outside the department. I think half the classes I took in school were not computer science or not even STEM. There's like law classes, policy classes, a lot of economics and business classes, even like design and art classes. And I think a lot of it goes to like making me like a much more well-rounded individual. And these are interests like I did not know I had, and these were a lot of times like fields that I did not know existed till like before I came to college. And within computer science as well, like I think people think of like computer science as just like one subject, but it's actually like a collection of a bunch of different things people can study. And what I thought would be interesting when I started computer science was very different from what I ended up focusing on by the time like I graduated. So I think there's like a huge range of things you can do, from like theoretical mathematical stuff to like very user focused HCI research. And I think it's like the open curriculum specifically allowed me to explore that.
So that's fantastic. I think our listeners and viewers would definitely want to know and go deeper into your understanding of computer science as overall sort of universe of academia and applications in the industry. So in your view, what is it like for a student to make those choices, and what are the things that they study year one, year two, and then by the time they graduate? And also, yeah, we'll talk about your coordinated degree program for the master's program. So how does that segue into what you were doing?
So is this like, do you mean specifically for Brown?
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Okay. So usually when people are studying computer science, like the first year is like much more foundational, where it's like, oh, like you do one of a few like introductory and intermediate classes to just like get a base foundation in the field. But beyond that, it's pretty much the world's your oyster, where like there are some requirements and like general directions, but like I think two things I'd note is like, one, the requirements are very flexible even within the major. And second, like most of the requirements are like soft requirements, in the sense that it's very easy to get like permissions or like overrules for those. So like I probably broke all the like requirement or rules for like the concentration. And at the end of the day, like it ended up being, yeah, like I can take whatever 15 or 20 computer science classes like I want to take, and combine that into like a degree that's computer science.
So what was your sort of path within those choices?
So I started off with very theoretical, algorithms focused stuff, very academic. But as I like moved through college, took a bunch of other classes outside the department, I realized that what I like to do a lot is like much more product design, and thinking about like, okay, who's using my things? Like, how do I design products that are better? And that pushed me to take much more like UI focused classes, or like just interaction design focused classes towards the end of my CS like education. And because there was not a lot of like rules or restrictions, like I didn't have to commit. Like I could pretty much like make that jump on my own.
So that's interesting. The UI, UX, and human-centered design is also something that you mentioned earlier, or interfaces. What is it like to go deeper into study of the aspect of design in computer science? If you were to describe it to a layman, of course, we see apps and websites and other things. But what does it really take to do well in that field?
I think one way to think of it is how do you design solutions and products that work for humans rather than the other way around? And that obviously needs an understanding of computer science and how computers work, but it's mostly like, how do you make sure that you're designing the right thing for the right person? I think one quick example is like doors, right? Like a lot of doors are like, you don't really know where it's like, if you're supposed to push it or pull it. And it doesn't really mean that the person is stupid. It means that the door is not well designed.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so typically, what does a UI, UX engineer do in a day-to-day sort of setting?
So if you have a background in say like HCI or product design, there's a bunch of different paths that people could take. You could become like a UI UX researcher, or like user researcher, which is like the more academic side of things, where you actually do research on like how do things like affect someone, and like actually run studies and user experiments. You could be a visual designer. You could become like a front end developer, or you could become like a PM like me, where you actually like combine a lot of those things and think about like, okay, what product am I building? Why am I building? And also tie in some business responsibilities, where like, are people going to buy this product?
Fantastic. So now tell me a little bit about the master's program. the coordinated master's program at Brown in the computer science department. How did the requirements work, and how do you sort of justify the need for doing that?
Sure. So to give a quick overview, Brown has the CS masters can be done in three different ways. One is like the regular masters, where you spend 2 years after your bachelor's degree doing a master's in computer science. Then there's like a fifth year master's program where it's like accelerated, and you spend your fifth year like doing your master's. And then there's like a smaller program called the concurrent master's program. And what happens is you finish all the requirements for the bachelor's and the master's degree within your 4 years. So it's like, in terms of the amount of work you're doing, it's equivalent to like if you had spent 5 or 6 years, it's just compressed into those 4 years. And for me, it was because I took a lot of CS classes, and I took a lot of classes in general. So like the number of classes you take at Brown is something that's also flexible. And I had a lot of credits by the time I entered like sophomore, junior year. So this was something that was like natural for me to do. Where if you see that like, okay, like with a little bit of additional or marginal effort, you can finish the requirements for both the bachelor's and the master's. It's like you're getting 2 degrees instead of 1.
Great. You definitely seem to have maybe burnt the candle on both ends. But yeah, so good. Now, in terms of internships or overall, the mood on campus for computer science majors, I know it's become such a popular major across campuses in the US. But what are the resources beyond academics in terms of alumni connections, people coming to campus, recruiters, internship opportunities, the challenges you might be part of, competitions, etc.? What all do you do beyond just the classes and your projects?
So specifically for professional opportunities, there's like the career lab, which is for like students across the spectrum, like no matter what field you're in. But then the CS department has its own recruiting program where companies come and recruit specifically with the CS department. And there's like industry partners who come and like do on-campus interviews. So, like your first rounds of interviews are going to happen like on campus. And something that helped me a lot is like the alumni network. There's a lot of people like graduating every year and joining a lot of like tech companies. And if those are like companies you're interested in, then alums are usually very, very responsive, because it's like a fairly small department. Like, yes, the CS department skyrocketed and it's like the largest department in school now, but it's still like a few hundred people, like 200-300 people graduating every year. So like I've had almost like more than a 50% response rate to like any person I've reached out to who's like a recent alum. So it's less a question of like, from most people, what I've seen is it's less a question of like, can I get this job? It's more a question of, do I want to do this job?
Interesting. Yeah. So that's the abundance mindset, I think, that's available in terms of alumni connection. What about the other things like the challenges, hackathons, conferences, anything that sort of sets you apart in terms of not just building your profile, but also getting you more brownie points when you apply for jobs? Did you participate in some of these?
I did a lot. I did a lot of hackathons my freshman year. There's one on campus as well, which is particularly geared towards first-time learners and people who are not necessarily like experts in the field. So it's like a great place for people to just start. There's also a lot of funding for different conferences like Grace Hopper. So if someone who identifies as a person of color or any of these groups like that a lot of these conferences are targeting, then like there's a lot of funding opportunities that's university sponsored. And like a lot of my friends use that, and I've heard like it was immensely helpful as well.
Fantastic. So if you were to look at the first internships or jobs, and then finally what led you to sort of find opportunities after you graduate, what was the journey like? What are the sort of, say, moments of discovery which led you to where you are today?
So when I first started, my first 2 summers, I did research. That's actually something that's like very common and popular among underclassmen because like like the professors are very accessible. You can spend an entire summer doing research with like an actual professor and not just grad students. And it's like fairly easy to get just because of the ratio of students to professors. There's the grad student population is like very small, so there's a lot of opportunities available for undergraduates. Um, and I think like a lot of students do research their first few summers because it's harder to do the summer after your junior year. So I started doing research. Then summer after my junior year, I ended up interning at Facebook. And how that worked was, I think for a lot of recruiting, I would just reach out to friends who had recently graduated or people I knew who had recently graduated, and they'd help me recruit. Plus, there'd be like dedicated recruiters for every company, and you go through a bunch of interviews. So one or the other is inevitably going to work out, and then based on like personal preferences, most people pick a company, see like what they think. And I think like internships are a great way to just figure out like, hey, is this something I really want to do after I graduate?
Fantastic. So, what is your current job, and what is that keeps you really busy and excited about continuing to be a CS software engineer and a product manager? So, what is the product manager's job? So, all of that, like what do you do, what
Sure.
organization, and where it's headed?
So I'm working at Microsoft. I'm a product manager. And the one way to think about this job is like it sits at the intersection of computer science, design, and business, where you have to have an understanding of all of these things. And I think the job of a product manager is essentially to like manage the product, like figure out what are we building, like who are we building for, why are we building this, is this actually good, are people going to pay for this, and manage all of that. And like to do all of that, people need to have an understanding of like in the underlying technology, but also like have a sense for design, also understand like business fundamentals. And I think it goes back to like me talking about like the classes I took in college, right? Like they were not just computer science. It was like a lot of design classes, a lot of business classes. So I think this is like the perfect way for me to like combine multiple facets of that education.
So, what's a day-to-day, like a day in the life of a product manager? Since you said there's this whole business side of it, so yeah, you don't have to disclose
Mm-hmm.
the products you're working on, but yeah, in general.
Yep. So the one good thing is like there is no 2 days that look alike. Like every single day, every single week is going to look different. But in general, things that I can expect to do is like get on a call with the customer, like talk to them about like what they think of the product, what are pain points they have, like how do they feel using it. Look at like metrics, like see how usage is looking. Look at experiments. If you're running A/B tests, like how are those performing? Go to like design ideations. Like if you're talking about like, oh, like what's a new feature we want to build, like go through usability studies, make like a maybe a launch plan, maybe like a blog post of like, hey, like we launched this cool product, like come up with a marketing plan for that. Uh, then that's like some of the things I do like on a day-to-day basis.
That's interesting. And Microsoft, of course, has reinvented itself in the last decade, I feel. What are the few areas in general for the industry to really work on? What are the big ideas the big tech firms are sort of working on today?
I think there's a lot of different clusters of people that are excited about very different things. I think there's like a huge community that's dedicated to autonomous vehicles, and there's a lot of like clusters around like social media where like the Facebook world lives. I think one interesting thing is to think about like how tech is going to impact different industries. So I think a lot of the interesting things is not just like what's happening within tech, but like what are other industries where technology can help or play a role. Like Airbnb was an example of this, where it's a tech company, but it's also like the hotel industry. Uh, or Uber is like it's a tech company, but it's also like the taxi or like logistics industry.
Interesting. So, if you were to look at influencers, it could be books, authors, entrepreneurs, even great software engineers. What are the three or four names you would say had some sort of influence in the way you think at work and also in general?
I think most recently, somebody who's been influencing me a lot is Professor Robert Sapolsky. He's a neuroscience professor at Stanford, and he wrote a book on how like humans behave and interact. And it pretty much gives you like a deep dive of like evolutionary biology, cognitive science. I think it's incredible for anybody who just wants to understand how humans think and behave. Someone else is Kahneman, who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow. I think incredible book to read.
Fantastic. So, if we were to look at the future, what does a product manager become? The CEO eventually? What's the general path?
That's actually a surprisingly common progression. A lot of people I know who are product managers leave to start their own companies because it's a lot of like overlapping skill sets, right? Like one way to think of like a product manager is also like you're the CEO of your product, but you don't have any of the authority. uh, but I think that's like one of the cool things about being a product manager is it gives you a lot of optionality. Like one of the reasons I loved an open education is that I had a lot of options when I graduated of like what I wanted to do and what I could do. And I think like the PM role extends that, where it's like I still have a lot of optionality on where I can go from here.
Yeah, so I think let's delve on the open education and also the social scene at Brown. So a lot of uh, the fun elements of Brown is because people feel empowered that they're adults, they can make the choices, and hence that open curriculum helps. But what are the other things that you do on campus or you did on campus which really helped you understand the world better and yourself better?
So some of the things I did on campus. Joined the ballroom team my senior year. So it's like a collegiate dancing, like competitive ballroom team. Like learned how to dance, which was super fun and rewarding. And the cool part is like you get to meet people from very different disciplines. Like there's no like stereotyped person who does ballroom. It's like very random people like picked across the university who just are okay looking a little ridiculous very publicly. So that was a lot of fun. Started playing squash, so met a lot of cool people through that. Uh, Also got involved and pulled into a lot of like cultural groups. So like a lot of countries have their own cultural groups, like the Singapore Students Association. And a lot of times, like I'll have friends who like pull me to their events because it's less about like it's less patriotic and more about like, hey, like this is a cool group of people who want to like hang out and get to know each other and have a fun time. And there's I think like enough of those like groups and events and parties happening to like meet people from very different parts of the world and from very different majors.
Great. And also, I visited Providence. There was a conference. I was there for almost a week. It's a small city, and
Mm-hmm.
crossing the canal, all of the lighting, I think they do once in every 2 weeks.
Yep.
Water fires, I think that's what they're called.
Yep.
So they try to make the town and the spirit come alive. What are the other things that you remember most about your time in Rhode Island? And of course, now you're in Seattle, a bustling city, but an interesting city for sure. How do you compare the two locations?
I actually think Providence was the perfect college city because, like, don't get me wrong, I love cities as much as the other person, and like I'd love to be in New York, but I think like Providence is perfect for like a college experience because, like it's on College Hill, so it's like a physical hill that you have to like go down and climb every time you leave campus, and it almost creates like a bubble where it's like most people are on campus most of the time. I think which creates for like a really nice environment where like even on weekends it's like stuff is happening on campus. Like you feel like there's always something happening. There's always people hanging out, and the likelihood of you meeting someone and running into someone and meeting new people is like much higher. But at the same time, I think like Providence is also like not nothing. So there's like enough things that's nearby and that's happening like outside where like if you want to leave once a week or like once a while, you can go out. I think it like strikes the perfect balance of like, yes, there is something if you want to leave and go out, but there's also like a really strong close knit college culture. The one thing I'd add is Providence, I think, has one of the highest number of restaurants per capita. So if somebody's into food, it's a great place to be.
Great. And how's Seattle in comparison to Providence?
Seattle is very different. I think more than Providence in Seattle, it's like there's a huge dichotomy between like the East Coast and West Coast, which I'm still getting used to. I think the East Coast, and when I say East Coast, it's like more New England, like New York and up, is very work hard, play hard. So like people are fairly diverse in terms of what they do, and want to work a lot, want to like party a lot and go out a lot. The West Coast and Seattle specifically is very different in a lot of ways. So first, it's like mostly dominated by tech. Like there are other industries, but not so much. And people, I think, here are a lot more laid back. So they take things easy. Life is slower, and people are much more outdoorsy, I think.
Great. So I'm going to switch gears and make you reflect on your high school years and your application process. What is it that worked for you, you think, reflecting on what you projected in your application?
I think for me, what worked was, and this is like specific to what I think worked for me for Brown, is they want people who are interesting, and this doesn't necessarily mean like you have the best grades possible or you have like the perfect SAT score, you have like straight fives on all your APs, and like all of that stuff is great and like matters, but it's like, I think one way to think about it is like the airport test, right? Like, would you want to be stuck with this person in an airport for 3 hours without Wi-Fi? And like, is it somebody who's just like fun to talk to and like interesting? And I think like most of the people I met in school had like very interesting stories and backgrounds and interests, and like something that like set them apart from like the usual. And one way to think about it is like a little weird, a little quirky, a little eccentric. And I think like everything like grades and stuff like obviously does matter, is important, but I don't think it's enough. Like, who are you? Why are you cool?
Wonderful. I think well said. So yeah, we always talk about students to demonstrate that that spirit, and also just kind of show that they're alive and thinking about different things, ideas that they really care about, and bring forth all of those in their application, not just for the sake of it, but also demonstrate that. So fantastic. So I'm going to ask you a few rapid fire questions just to change the pace of things. In this
Sure.
COVID era, shelter in place, lockdown in India for that matter, what have you discovered about yourself, things that you've reconnected with, or things that you restarted to do, or new things that you've committed to doing?
Two things: work out a lot and connect with friends, even if they're remote and it's not convenient.
Okay, super. Next question. If you were to pick 3 adjectives that describe your strengths, what would they be?
Open to new ideas, funny, hopefully, and loves to try new food.
That's cool. Finally, some sort of advice to high school students or even recent high school graduates who are supposed to go to college, but there's so much uncertainty. In your life, do you have experiences where you've been disappointed or failed or things or don't know how to deal with uncertainty? What were those experiences? How did you react initially, and how did you then finally cope with it? So that's the advice you could offer people who are kind of disappointed with the situation as of now.
Yep. I think one thing I'd say is most people fail. I think, let me rephrase, everybody fails, and most people fail way more often than you'd realize. Something that happened was we started a thread on this in our school, and like a lot of professors started talking about a lot of their failures, and you realize that like some of the smartest people that you'll know in your life have had like incredible and monumental failures where things just did not work out for them. And that doesn't mean that like they're necessarily bad or not good at what they do. It's just like a part of life, and you have to uh, keep moving on. I think like grit matters a lot more than intelligence.
Fantastic. So thank you, Ishan, for all that you've offered today to our listeners and viewers, not just your interest in computer science, but also the way you've sort of shared about your experiences at Brown and now at work at Microsoft. So thanks again, and we'll be in touch. We will be organizing a few panels and on kind of mix them up with a product manager and an artist, perhaps, and so on and so forth. If time permits and time zones don't make it a big issue, I will invite you.
For sure. Thanks for having me, Arjun.
It was great seeing you, Shan.